Another story that's been big in today's news is Prime Minister Theresa May's decision to confirm a full inquiry into how contaminated blood transfusions infected thousands of people with hepatitis C and HIV. It's said to have been a factor in over 2,400 deaths throughout the 70s and 80s. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has long campaigned for such an inquiry and for the full truth to emerge.
Yeah, it's a day that's taken far, far too long in coming, and there's no party politics here. All political parties have let down those who've suffered as a result of contaminated blood. But at least this day has come, and what we now need is an inquiry that doesn't just look at the original negligence, which there clearly was, it also needs to look at the cover-up that followed. So what we now need to do is work across political lines to get this right, in the same way that political parties came together to give people truth and justice over Hillsborough.
Sue Threakall from Devon's been campaigning for more than 30 years after her husband Bob died when he received contaminated blood. She wrote an email to Peter Heaton-Jones, who's the Conservative MP for Devon North, which he read out in the Commons today.
My husband Bob died in 1991, aged 47. Despite being a severe haemophiliac, he had lived a relatively normal life until he was given commercial blood products. Following that, his health and his life followed a deep and dark downhill path. He contracted hepatitis B, C and HIV. He died a terrible death, which I believe was wholly avoidable. He was never informed about the risks known at the time of imported factor VIII. He was never told he had hepatitis C, and indeed I only found out myself a few years ago. His HIV test result was withheld from us for many months, thus leaving me at risk. I was fortunate, but many other women were not. From autumn of 1990 until 2 days before he died, a few months later, with shadowing on his lungs and despite being at high risk of contracting pneumonia, he was left untreated. He never had the chance to see his eldest son married, nor to meet his grandchildren. He didn't see his middle son graduate from university. He didn't see his youngest son pass the 11+ and go to grammar school. Following his death, our family basically fell apart. Grief sent us in different directions, and for many years we were completely broken. The fallout is still there today, bubbling away just below the surface. It is my firm opinion, Sue Threakall writes in conclusion, following campaigning and research since 1985, that haemophiliacs were used as guinea pigs. I believe that had people acted differently at the time, Bob and so many others would almost certainly be alive and well today.
So that was Peter Heaton-Jones, Conservative MP for Devon North, reading out an email from one of his constituents, Sue Threakall. And Sue joins us now. Evening.
Hello.
Sue, for you, what's the key to the scope of this inquiry? What does it need to make sure it takes in?
I think the key to me is that it needs to have full victim involvement right the way through. It's no good them convening an inquiry with people they choose and with terms of reference that they decide on without actually consulting with us. I think we've got to get it right this time to enable the truth to finally come out. People have fought for, as Andy Burnham said, for over 30 years. I started campaigning in 1985, and it has kind of made the whole situation worse. What was a dreadful situation for people to find themselves in to start with has just been made so much worse by the attitude of successive governments who've kind of sidelined us. They've treated us as if we were just after money, and whenever we've approached the government with either evidence, as we've seen it, or with questions to be asked, they've always avoided it. They've always kind of ducked the issue. So I was holding my breath this morning. I really did not think this would happen, because it was supposed to be a vote following at the end of the debate, but in fact it was announced earlier on, about midday, and I was just absolutely shocked, rigid. I didn't think it would happen, and I just hope that now that they've made that announcement, and now there seems to be a huge willingness and support on all sides of the House, that they get it right.
Why do you think you've been ignored by successive governments?
I think there are a couple of reasons. I think the one reason is that they decided very, very early on that paying proper compensation for what had happened, and they knew what had happened, I mean, there's no doubt about that, would be too expensive. And they stuck with that decision then through thick and thin. And for that, I entirely blame Treasury officials and civil servants, both within the Treasury and the Department of Health, because after all, they advise, they write the briefs, and I don't think that decision was ever questioned. As I said, they've stuck to it. The second reason is because if you look at other disasters, such as the Paddington Rail disaster, the Marchioness, the Herald of Free Enterprise, the Lockerbie bombing, and so on and so forth, if you're looking at culpability, you're looking at outside bodies, i.e. outside government. So you're looking at shipping lines, you're looking at terrorists and so on. With this, it's completely different because it goes to the very, very heart of government. It goes to the heart of the Department of Health, individuals within the Department of Health and in other government departments, and also with other bodies such as the UK Haemophilia Centre Directors Organisation, who were very closely allied with government. So really, what we've been asking them to do is to have an inquiry into themselves, and this is why I believe they should have no part of it. It should be completely independent of government in order for it to be transparent, and in order for people to be called under oath as witnesses, because again, they have consistently avoided actually giving evidence. They avoided giving it to the Archer inquiry, which was a privately funded inquiry. They didn't go along and give evidence to that. They didn't give evidence to the Penrose inquiry in Scotland. They reckon they cooperated with it, whatever that's supposed to mean. And whereas I am hugely, hugely grateful to my MP, my previous MP, all the MPs who stood up today in support of us, I'm very angry that this has taken 30-odd years and so many people, people who were really good friends of the campaigners, who worked really, really hard to get a result like this, won't be there to see it.
What shape does justice take for you then?
The essential thing for me is that the truth comes out so that we are vindicated, so that those people who say, oh, you were only after the money, or why don't you just move on with your lives, or don't be silly, they wouldn't have done that to babies and children, that couldn't have happened, so that those people can at last hear it from people, from someone other than us.
And Sue, just for the record, are you after any compensation, or are you just after the truth?
I think the two go hand in hand, simply because people have lost so much. They've lost so much emotionally and financially. People have lost their homes because when they became ill, or when the main breadwinner, for example, died, or when, as in my case, people had to give up a career in order to look after whoever was ill. People have lost huge amounts of money. They've not been able to afford them to pay their mortgage, so they lost their home. We've had people who lost their home because it was burnt down because they were labelled by the local community as AIDS scum. People have lost careers, people have lost pensions, they weren't able to get life insurance, they couldn't travel abroad. So, yeah, the financial aspect is important because as the years have gone on, these things that happened initially, like losing a job, losing a career and so on, have had a knock-on effect. So as people have got older, they've not been... We don't all want to be multimillionaires and live on yachts in the Caribbean. What we want, essentially, is to be put back in a position that most of us would have been in had this not happened to us.
Talk to me on a personal note about how your life has been since the early 90s, because it must be one thing to cope with the loss of a husband, but to then find yourself having to be thrust into a campaign like this just to find out what happened to Bob must have taken its toll, Sue.
Well, yeah, I think it has, and I actually suspect that we probably won't realise exactly what toll it's taken until this is all over. Until one day we wake up and we haven't got to spend half our lives going through Google searches or Wikipedia or ringing the Department of Health or making an appointment with our MP, because Yeah, we try and do all the normal stuff as well, like, have friends go out, have holidays and all that sort of thing. But it's very difficult because even if you're away from home, you're on constant alert and constant watch. I know I always keep my phone on and, I've done interviews from the strangest of places. We won't go there. But, yeah, I think it would be odd not to have this. But having said that, I think certainly with Tainted Blood, the group that I'm secretary of, I see it as one of our roles to make sure that we leave a legacy, and that legacy will be the stories and the photographs, so that future generations can see what happened, can see them as real people, and hopefully ensure it never happens again.
Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us, Sue. I'm really grateful to you.
That's absolutely no trouble. Thank you for having me on.
Take care. Sue Threakall, who is leading and at the heart of that campaign. And the Prime Minister's confirmed a full inquiry into how contaminated blood transfusions infected thousands of people with hepatitis C and HIV, said to have been a factor in over 2,400 deaths.
Theresa May says an inquiry into the NHS blood contamination scandal will give answers to what she's called the appalling tragedy. Almost 2,500 people died after being given products in the 70s and 80s that were infected with hepatitis C and HIV. Sue Threakall from Devon has been campaigning for more than 30 years following the death of her husband.
The key to me is that it needs to have full victim involvement right the way through. It's no good them convening an inquiry with people they choose and with terms of reference that they decide on without actually consulting with us.
This is BBC 5 Live.
And with the BBC News on 5 Live, here's Liam Smedley.
Relatives of some of those killed during the NHS Contaminated Blood Scandal say they want to be closely involved in an inquiry into the tragedy. Almost 2,500 people died after being given products from abroad infected with hepatitis C and HIV during the 70s and 80s. Here's Jeremy Corbyn.
It was obviously a serious systemic failure. I think we need the strongest possible inquiry that can, if necessary, lead to prosecution and actions as a result of it, but above all, get to the bottom of it. So a broad, public, inquisitive inquiry is very important.